Cowboys and Elves 8 by T. Martino. Soon the bearded man showed signs that he was weary walking. Finn and Terry noticed this, and the group stopped. He was burned in places, and the skin was blistering. This was alarming, and Finn asked all to help him make camp as he tended the injured man. Terry commented to Finn in her language, "This is why you didn't fight your way out of the cavern. He was injured, and you did not know how badly. Burns are tricky. They look like nothing and then get bad." Finn glanced up at her, and his face was sad and grave. They made the man comfortable. He was strong-looking, and maybe in his 30s. His beard was brown, as was his hair, which was long and tangled. He smiled at the old woman. Terry asked him his name. He pronounced it, but it was long. It did start with a B. Terry tripped over the name. She repeated it several times, but could not pronounce it. Neither could Slim, who quickly gave up. Tor repeated it perfectly and slowly for her. Terry looked at Tor and sighed. "I think I'm going to call you Belle. That's as close as I can get. Sorry." The man laughed softly, then winced as Finn lightly covered a burn with a light bandage. Over the course of several days, Terry studied the man carefully. He was a man, but not like Terry and Slim, who both were dark. Terry had very straight hair and Slim's curly as a lamb. Belle had wavy hair and fair skin. Terry could tell he was worried. He talked long with Finn, as they could understand much of each other's language. Finn listened gravely, but said little back. And Terry felt that this was a mysterious matter that Belle was facing, and Finn could offer little advice about it. However, one morning, Belle motioned Terry to come up to him. She did so. He then, out of the grass he was laying on, pulled up one fresh green leaf and one dead brown one. Finn noticed this and motioned to Tor, and they all came and sat around the bedroll they had made for the injured Belle. Slim asked Terry, "What's he saying, Enoch?" Terry looked up from the leaves Belle held. "He's asking about death, I think, what I think about it." Terry pointed at the grass growing out of the earth. She touched a tiny blue spring flower. Then she pointed with the back of her hand at the sun, and gestured at the grass as it would be later with the hot summer sun above, and then pointed at the grass head to show where seeds would come. Then she put her arms around herself and mimicked being cold. She looked up and with her hands gestured the snow falling and winter winds. The grass she showed with a smoothing gesture covered by snows and hidden. And then she pointed at the grass coming up. Then she looked at the man and made a clockwise circle with her finger over and over and over. Then with a sweeping gesture included everything around them. Finn watched her closely and felt as near as he dared the thoughts of Terry Mika, an old woman explaining death and from another place. Belle looked at Terry deeply, and the old woman could feel and see he was afraid of dying. She glanced up at Finn, who was watching her, and she could tell he had immense interest and compassion about this subject. Terry then got up. She went to a patch of weeds and searched and then smiled. She cupped something softly in her hand. It was a caterpillar. She laughed at it, a simple little soft worm with legs. She used her hand to show the caterpillar climbing a plant and forming a chrysalis. Then she mimicked an expression of the caterpillar with a questioning and astonished look. She demonstrated that look to her audience and put her hand up to her face and gasped, showing the caterpillar's wonder at his transformation. Finn smiled at her. Then she waited a bit, looking at each of them in turn. Then she formed the wings of a butterfly coming out of a chrysalis with her hands. The butterfly was so unlike the caterpillar, and now he could fly. She smiled at the bearded man. He softly took her hand. The bearded man then gestured out at the vast world around them. It was getting dark by now, and he looked up at the cloudy sky, the stars hidden, and then made a gesture of fear and a saddened face he mimicked, shivering. Slim asked, "What does he mean, Enoch?" Terry was looking at Finn. "He's scared of the Creator. Something makes him not trust." Slim said, "Does he understand the Creator has walked with us sometimes?" Terry looked at Slim. "Slim, this is another world. How should I know? Do I look like a philosopher to you?" Slim said, "Well, nope, you don't at that." Then Terry got up, knelt by Belle, and whispered in his ear. Finn could not hear what she said. But after, she leaned back and gestured at the sky, then with 2 fingers made a clockwise circle by her head, and then she nodded. The bearded man lay back and looked relieved in a quiet way. Slim thought to himself, a still, small, calm, and gentle voice. That's how you can tell it's the Creator. He smiled. Then he stood up and looked up at the sky and said humbly, hat in hand, "Sorry for all my drinking." Terry laughed softly and shook her head. The old woman then got out her bedroll and laid it out near the fire, yawned and gave a little wave to Finn and Tor, and went to sleep. As the man healed, he got up one morning and joined Terry fishing by the little lake near where they camped. She could tell he was still wondering at their conversation that one day. Terry threw a rock into the lake. The circle of the ripple was big. Terry pointed to it, spreading out over the lake, and even now the tiny waves it made touched the shore. She then picked up 5 stones and flung them out. 2 skipped once and 3 sank quickly, but the ripples touched each other and merged in a complicated way, and then touched as they came ashore. She gestured at Belle's bandages, and then at Finn, who sat watching. She looked at Belle, and then pointed to the sky, and made the circle gesture by her head, then pointed to her heart, and then to Finn's heart, and then to Belle's heart, and smiled softly. She put down her hand line and pointed to herself, but when she was much younger, by showing when she was smaller with her hands. She laughed and made a gesture of herself riding her pony in the mountains as a child. She did this by placing one hand on the other and making the fingers gallop. Then with 2 fingers she showed her parents letting her go ride free with her good pony and her father's hunting dogs. She showed her mother's worry, but her father's trust with their expressions. Then looked at Belle seriously and pointed up at the sky and again made the circle gesture by her head. The old woman then looked up at Finn and smiled. She made a gesture of letting go, as if of a bird. Finn came up and sat next to Terry. And through the long afternoon they sat like that as Terry fished. Finn took off a silver ring with his emblem engraved on it, and he handed it to Terry. Terry smiled and looked at it carefully. Finn had been meaning to give her this gift, and he had engraved something on it on the inside, though Terry could not understand the script. She handed Finn her hand line and walked to her pommel bag and got out a bootlace, then walked back to Finn. She showed him the ring was too big for her finger and then hung it on the bootlace and hung it around her neck and then put it inside her shirt. Finn then held up a gold chain before her. The old woman smiled. "Pretty," she told him in English. Finn handed it to her. She admired it, then handed it back. He laughed softly and pointed to the chain, then to her, and gave it to her once more. Terry nodded and said thank you and put it in her pocket. Finn shook his head, amused, and then pointed to the bootlace around her neck that held the ring. Terry pulled the ring outside her shirt. Tor, sitting nearby, laughed and told Finn, "Finn, you are entering a Verrier cultural problem, cousin." Finn pointed at the bootlace and then to the chain and handed the chain back to her. Terry nodded, smiled, and put the chain in her pocket again. Then Finn was going to attempt to re-explain and showed her the gold chain he wore when Terry pointed at a little gray hawk sitting on a branch across the lake. Then she pointed at herself. Then she pointed at a very brightly colored bird singing in the reeds, and then pointed at Finn and Tor. Tor, sitting nearby, said, "So the plain bird is a good hunter, and the brightly colored bird is very bright. And good for what, Verrier?" Finn laughed. Terry then pointed at Finn and Tor's swords for the brightly colored bird. "Oh, I see. The bright bird is a good swordsman." Finn shook his head. "I'm not sure I understand you, Verrier. The plain bird is you, and the bright bird, oh, I understand. For you must be plain." He pointed at the goshawk, and then at her. "For us it is normal to be brightly colored. Is that right?" He then pointed at the brightly colored bird and then at himself. Terry guessed his meaning and nodded. They then sat the rest of the day, and Terry fished, and the sun sank down to rest in the west.